Good evening and welcome to the BS and Beer Show. Of course, BS stands for Building Science. Tonight's topic is building codes. Where did they come from and where should they go? I'm Travis Brungart, calling in from Kansas City. Tonight I'm drinking a Biensteppener. It's a Bavarian Hefeweiss beer, which is a delicious favorite of mine. Not a sour, my other favorite, which I usually drink when Emily's not on. I like to really rub it in how much I'm enjoying my sour, but restraint tonight. I want to take a minute to just encourage the local BS and beer chapters, of which there are many, growing more and more every day. We're in Australia now. We've got people in, I think, was it this week? Yeah, Nathan in Chattanooga did a great thing on rain screens this week. There's a lot of good stuff going on. So if you're looking for BS and beer in your area, you can go to the BS and Beer Show website. You can go to Instagram and just type BS_ and find them there, or you can start your own group. So let us know if you need resources for that. We'll help with that too. Of course, we want to thank our media partners, Green Building Advisor and Fine Home Building Magazine. And we're privileged tonight to have some extra FHB in the house with our good friend, Patrick McCombe. Thanks for joining us, Patrick.
Thanks for having me, Travis. It's a pleasure.
Special guest host. Kind of a big deal, man. It's a big deal.
It's almost like Saturday Night Live, brother.
He's a pro.
That's right, man. We're really high in tonight. With that, I'm going to kick it over to Kylie to explain the mechanics of the show.
Yeah, fun stuff. I'll make it quick. So if you're new to Zoom, you need to find the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And when you want to make a comment, click all panelists and attendees so everybody can see your questions and comments. If you have a mobile device, you may need to do this each time you comment. If you want to see everybody on the screen, you're just seeing one person, you're going to have to select speaker view or gallery view at the top of your screen. Tonight we'll have a presentation from Glenn and the panel discussion followed by audience questions, and we will wrap up precisely at 7:30. If you want to see a video of tonight's recording or want to recommend it to others, you can find that on Green Building Advisor on Sunday. And all past shows can be found on YouTube through a link at the bsnbeershow.com. I do have one special announcement tonight, and that is that the Fine Home Building team has asked that I let you know that the summit is coming up on October 26th through 29th, and they're offering free admission to the first 10 people who email fhads@taunton, that's TAUNTON.com, and in the subject line write Kylie sent me, and you will get free admission to that. It's going to be fantastic. I highly recommend it. So I will put this email address in the chat box so you all have it. And with that, Mike's going to make further announcements.
Yes, I'm Mike. Mike Maines in Maine. Tonight I am drinking a Lone Pine Brewing Brightside IPA, an excellent local brew here from Portland, Maine. Before getting into announcements, I do just have a quick surprise here. In case anybody didn't get the joke in the show title, I just want to see, can you see my screen there? All right.
It's happening.
All right, so that's what's been playing in my head for a few weeks now, so now it can be stuck in yours too. A few announcements. See, Kylie mentioned the summit here in Maine. We have the Passive House Maine Annual Fall Forum. That's always an excellent event, and we'll actually be BS and Beer will be doing that as part of Passive House Maine. I'll put links in the chat box when I'm done. And that is Passive House Maine is the fall forum is October 21st to 23rd, so just before the summit. Basically the same time as the summit is another Maine group, the Maine Indoor Air Quality Council. Actually puts on a really excellent forum every year. They're doing theirs this year, October 27th to 29th. These are all virtual, of course. Over in Vermont, SEON, S-E-O-N, sustainable something or other. They're friends of BS and Beer and have a similar discussion group there that predates us. On November 7th, they're touring 4 high-performance homes, including 2 by former BS and Beer guests. Bob Swinburne was the architect, and Mindell and Morse was the builder of one really cool Passive House. And then Ted Benson and Unity Homes is another house on the tour, plus a couple of others. And then finally, if you enjoy BS and Beer, you might want to check out Passive House Accelerator's Global Happy Hour on Wednesday evenings, pretty similar to what we do, with a focus on Passive House. And then on Fridays, you might appreciate BS Fridays with Dave Cooper and Mark Willie. So we'll put links to all those in the chat box. And I will turn it over to Travis to introduce tonight's guests.
You're on mute, Travis.
Well, that's a rookie mistake. That's what everyone tunes in for, is the technical difficulties, right? So moving things along, yes, I have the pleasure of introducing both Glenn Mathewson and John Deans. First, we'll talk about Glenn, who has authored over 70 technical articles in trade publications, including Fine Home Building, and contributed to the International Code Council 2009 book on deck construction. He's a professional speaker and an educator in residential codes, with audiences ranging from contractors to building officials at both public and private events. He founded and runs buildingcodecollege.com, an online school to provide education on the intent and purpose of code provisions. And he's an excellent speaker. I saw him at the summit last year. It's a pleasure to have you, Glenn. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you,
And
Travis.
if you would like to mention anything about yourself, like say, what are you drinking tonight?
Sure. Well, I really wanted to get an IPA. I'm an IPA man, but I went to the liquor store today. I didn't change out of my pajamas, kept them on. That's how we do it now. And I was sitting there looking, and I saw the Colorado Native, and I'm like, I gotta represent Colorado. I'm getting to start drinking at 4 o'clock over here, not like you guys in New England. So I thought I better represent. So this is Colorado Native Amber, and the cool thing though for you, this is only available in Colorado. Sorry, suckers. Actually, I'd rather have an IPA.
Way to keep it local, Glenn. Thanks again for joining us. We're also fortunate tonight to be joined once again by our friend John Deans, who's a repeat offender of BS. We're glad to have you back, my friend. He's a carpenter and marketing director for Emerald Builders in, I'm going to mess it up, Bowdenham?
Bodenham.
Damn, I knew I was going to mess it up. That's part of the entertainment segment. They're in Maine. Previously, he was an organizer and campaigner for Greenpeace and other progressive causes. At Emerald Builders, along with providing carpentry skills, John is the in-house sustainability expert and spends part of his time promoting the company's work. John, it's a pleasure to have you back. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here. I'm drinking a Kushnock Brewing, but look at the name on this: Gigantic Dad Pants IPA. Which
That's awesome.
this was so I just did an 11-hour day, just got down off a roof doing some sheathing, running out the job site, and one of our previous clients happened to pull in to say hi with cold beers and sent me one on the road. So
Nice.
this one feels well earned today. I want to just echo what Mike said too. I'm on the board of Passive House Maine, and I think this is a really exciting online fall forum this year. One of the things that I think is really great is that there's a track for young people, specifically a student track. So stuff for your kids or for young people you know, or if you work with schools or anything like that, it's a great opportunity to get young people involved. We need more young people getting into the trades, learning about building science, high performance building, passive house. So I think it's a really exciting forum coming up. It's been put together really well. So I wouldn't be doing my job as a board member without promoting it a little bit more.
That's a really unique opportunity. Thanks for telling us about that. I'm making a note, and that's not something I often do. So,
and because it's online, everybody can be a part of it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, John. With that, we're going to get started with Glenn is going to share a presentation with us, and then we'll get into the discussion after that. Are you good to go, Glenn?
I think so, just about.
Awesome. Feel free to begin sharing.
Okay. Let's see here. Choose desktop one. Get this thing in play mode. All right, you guys see building code history summarized and a bunch of old code books in the background. So good guy to be talking about building code history just as well as building codes in general, because I actually collect vintage building codes. I know I get invited to all the parties, but I've got over 700 vintage building codes going back to 1859. But I just love history in general, and it's amazing how much we can learn from history. And sometimes we think that everything we're doing is so new and modern, and you look back in history and you go, oh, how funny, that was already happening. So Let's get started then. This is obviously very summarized. I could spend a 6-hour webinar on building code history. I'm going to start with what everybody's probably heard of before, right? The King of Babylon, the Code of Hammurabi. And the original first edition of this I don't have. It was written on a stone tablet. But I do actually have the second edition of Hammurabi's code. Jokingly, it was reprinted and printed in 1904 by the University of Chicago. Very interesting what they did. They took the Babylonian text on the left and they translated it in English to the right. And here's that language that many have anecdotally heard of, that the king would say, if a builder builds a house and the house collapses and kills the owner, then the builder shall be put to death. Interestingly, that was it. Like, what happens if the building collapsed and nobody died? I don't know. King wasn't worried about that. That's what you get when you get code from a king. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today as I go through this presentation is, where did these different codes come from and how did we get to where we get the codes we have today? So code from a king was pretty much focused on one thing, right? Structural stability. And it didn't tell you how to do that. It was a performance code. It just said, I don't care what you build it out of, but if it falls and kills someone, you get put to death. All right, so there's a little take of what code from a king looks like. Now, we move forward into more modern times, modern like 1808. This is actually a newspaper that I have. One of the few people that would spend this kind of money for an 1808 newspaper. But this is from 1808, where indeed we are getting the printed words of George Washington himself and the declarations he made for building codes in 1791 in October. Now, my friends that know history, I just let you know, if you don't know, that was before the Bill of Rights was ratified. So we had building regulations before we had freedom of speech. And so what this 1808 article is showing is, here's what George Washington said in 1791, that all outer walls of houses shall be made of brick or stone. Well, who's got the money for that? So very quickly, Washington says, hold on, these regulations were found to impede the settlement in the city of mechanics and others whose circumstances did not admit of erecting houses authorized by said regulations. What he basically said is, within short order of this ultimate safety provision, brick or stone, the mechanics, i.e. poor people, quickly said, no, we're not building that way. And so he retracted very fast and said, all right, well, it turns out nobody's able to build in the city now. Now, 1808 voice, we now get to hear from Thomas Jefferson, right? Our second US president, talking about building codes. And he basically says here in this 1808 article, I'm going to keep suspending Jefferson's rule of stone or brick. We're going to just keep kind of, keeping a blind eye to people building out of wood. I'm going to suspend that until 1809. Now, why? Same thing presidents do today. James Madison becomes president in 1809. So Thomas Jefferson basically said, this is a problem. I'm not going to touch it. I'm just going to push it off till I'm not president anymore. Typical, right, of probably code from a president. What was the presidential code? Fire safety. It was all about not burning down the cities. And what's the best way to eliminate fire? Force everybody to build out of brick or stone. There you go, right? And then now we have every bit of safety we want. Except, again, they realized that safety has to be paid for. And so they quickly made allowances for wood, because wood was plentiful in North America, still is today. It's affordable. They could mill it, build their own homes, and these people could have shelter. Now, this is a home from 1876. It's a ghost town in Colorado. That's my family from probably a decade ago up there. Just a little funny side note, take a look inside these homes from this ghost town in the 1800s. Looks familiar, doesn't it? 24-inch on center studs, single top plate, stacked framing. Now, what if you told these guys, these miners in the 1800s, that today we were going to call this advanced framing? Interesting. All right. So where did code come from in the 1800s? It couldn't come from presidents. Glenn, I thought you were like all, understood America and American history. The federal government has no authority in construction and in regulation and codes. Federal government can only be granted the rights that's granted in our Constitution. And so then we have a United States, right? And so all the states get to handle the regulations for buildings. So that presidential declarations we saw actually was just for the city of Washington, now referred to as Washington, D.C. So just a little tidbit how even the presidents couldn't do it at the federal level. So in these 1800s, it was all from city governments. City governments, by the path of our American political system, drops you down from federal to state to the municipalities. They were the ones writing the code, like this code from the city of Boston in 1892. Now, what's the straight talk of code from a city government? It's code from local politicians. What do local politicians want? They want to have the best city. They want to attract business to the city, economics to the city, growth in the city. They have a bias for their city and the growth and the beauty and the fame of their city, right? And so we see what that could mean, code from a city government. Now, just for fun, in this 1892 book, I open it up and you have a brief history of laws of Boston. History written in 1892. And what does it tell us? There was a fire in 1679. And what did Boston do? We're not going to have our city burned down. So they said the same thing the president said. Everything has to be built of brick or stone. Well, when you read further in this history, the next thing you read is, well, this act did not seem to be enforced. And so they tried another act and they allowed small little wooden things, basically outhouses. And it goes on to say, well, this act was also not enforced. And it goes back and forth over 100 years of them continually trying to prohibit wood. And those damn mechanics just wanted shelter. Dang, they kept screwing up the plans for perfect fire safety. That's likely what was going on. What was happening here is we wanted the best safety, but it wasn't a reality for the public. They could build with wood. What other codes and safety provisions were we worried about in the 1800s? We were worried about sanitation. So here's something you get from 1881. Again, the late 1800s was right when we started really seeing a lot of this ramp up. And this is where you got sanitation. And what do we see here? Registration of plumbers and supervision of plumbing and drainage in the cities. So we start to bring in plumbing and sanitation into the codes. We also, from this same book from 1892, New York's Health Department, heat, cooking, and illumination, right? Basics for human survival. We got shelter, structural stability, fire protection. But what else do we need for human survival? Sanitation, heat, cooking, illumination. But what's so cool about this 1892 book is it also represents society's expectations and their new progressive technologies and materials coming about. Look at this. It's this amazing. The use of gas for fuel and illumination has enormously increased within the last decade. And there's a tendency for folks to use gas instead of coal. So you see the code being reactive to society, saying society's done with this dirty coal and burning lumber. They got this natural gas. Let's get this addressed for them in the code. But back to fire, right? Fire is the biggest deal when it comes to building code. Nobody wants fire. We all want that to be prevented in our cities and homes. But who pays the bill, the financial bill? It's the insurance companies. It's the National Board of Fire Underwriters if we go back to the late 1800s. And so we saw a whole new dynamic shift happen in the 1890s. And that's when the National Board of Fire Underwriters came along and said, you know what, you cities, you keep saying build with brick or stone, and you don't budge off of that. Your people want shelter. They're building out of wood, and they're doing it because they're going to live. And then your cities are burning down. And all you keep saying is build out of brick or stone, build out of brick or stone. And so the fire underwriters said, we're done paying for your burned down cities. You either follow our suggested codes or we don't underwrite your city anymore. They used a little bit of their power in the capitalist world like that to sort of persuade these cities. And what we had born here was the concept of a model code, meaning it doesn't come from a government. It's just a book. Look at the title of this one from 1920s, a code of suggestions, because they have no power over the people. There's that first concept where we get the authorship of the code out of the government hands. So what do we have? Now we have code from an insurance company or from many insurance companies and folks involved in fire underwriting. So they also put together this building code. That was the dwelling code that we were looking at a moment ago. This is the building code. And what do we see again? Recommended, right? Think of the language, suggested, recommended, no authority. But this was an amazing time. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, the history of the National Board of Fire Underwriters is amazing because of the public-private benefit it created. The public doesn't want fires, the government doesn't want fires, and the insurance companies don't want fires. So the insurance companies used their financial resources to develop all these codes, and they gave them for free to any jurisdictions, any cities that would adopt them. And so now the cities are starting to put the choices of a safe environment and a safe civilization, and they're starting to put it into the hands of professionals in those safety-oriented fields, like fire analysis and fire investigation. So this just amazing public-private benefit. I wish we could see more of that in today's world other than private selfishness. Anyway, what else came from the National Board of Fire Underwriters? Something familiar a lot of you guys may have heard of, UL, Underwriters Laboratory. Check it out. It formed from the National Board of Fire Underwriters. Those guys are saying, we understand fire, but we don't understand how to, and we know fire comes from electrical devices, but we don't know anything about those devices. So they spun off and created this other thing that has now become obviously very well known. What else came from National Board of Fire Underwriters? The NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association. Take a look at this National Electrical Code. And what do you see? NFPA right alongside National Board of Fire Underwriters. Wow, those insurance guys were a piece of everything that we see today in all these organizations. NFPA, they also spurred out of the Board of Fire Underwriters, similarly to UL, in that fire sprinklers were becoming very popular and there were no standards for fire sprinklers. The fire underwriters don't know anything about a sprinkler head. They know that that puts out the fire, but they don't know about the devices. So a more specific organization, NFPA, was created, and it really started with fire sprinklers in the late 1800s. And by 1911, NFPA took over the National Electric Code. And so now, as many of you are familiar with, NFPA still handles the National Electrical Code. So what did we see here? Who was developing code now? Code from the fire industry. You know, again, people that are involved in the products and the product manufacturing that are now developing code. Now, quick little side bit, just because I want to talk about the evolution of the different safety things. You also saw the need for exiting, right? We were building out of wood. We were trying to protect the wood still. Houses are still burning down. And we're trying to sprinkler. Things are still burning. So what's the multi-prong approach? We can't just stop everything from burning because we can't just have everyone build out of wood or stone. So let's also add getting people the hell out of the house or the building, because we can't just stop it from burning. So we get these multiple approaches to safety, and you get this building exits code all about egress. So we start to see the concept of getting people out of the buildings coming into building codes. Now, federal government comes back into play in the 1930s to 1950s kind of area. And take a look at these three books here. Department of Commerce. The federal government Department of Commerce? What the hell are they doing? They're writing and studying and researching minimum recommendations. Recommended, again, recommended, because, right, the federal government is like the national board. They have no authority over the states for this. So they were doing a lot of research to recommend minimum standards to the cities, like on plumbing or fire resistance. So why commerce? Why the heck would the Department of Commerce be involved? Because the federal government was getting a ton of complaints that the local codes were too expensive. Why would local codes be too expensive? Because the local politicians, they're just focused on the success of their city, like any politician, right? The president wants the country to be the best it is in that 4-year period. So these politicians were creating these crazy rules from their single bias, and then people are looking at the federal government going, we cannot do what they're asking us to do. So the federal government Department of Commerce gets involved in trying to create affordable minimum standards and then encouraging the cities to go along with those. What comes around in the 1920s? A whole nother concept of model building codes. And now we get it from not the government, from government workers. You know, those lowly, like low-paid inspector types that have nothing to gain or lose, right? They're not going to sell more product. They're not going to reduce insurance claims. They're not going to make their city look so beautiful and be renowned as the greatest mayor of all time. They just do their lowly little job and get their lowly little paycheck. And so the idea said, hey, let's let how about these code organizations of workers, of just regular class working people, they'll get together in their organizations, and they started developing code. Now, they saw something different that other people didn't see. They saw that brick or stone is non-combustible, safest thing possible. But they saw the people that they have to go and interface with every day and inspect and plan review and go to their private homes, realize that they can't meet this level of safety. So this is the perfect professionals that also see where the vision of the code meets the reality of the American backyards. And so they start to get involved in code development. I love this statement from the 1927 UBC. It's the first code from a code organization, from those lowly workers that have to actually face the American people. They say in their preface, they've developed this code to create safe buildings for the greatest economy and good of the public, right? Safety is stone or brick, but that has no good of the public or economy. So they are the ones that created this balance between affordability and safety. Now, what do we have though? They're regional, they're local, right? These are just local workers. And so we get 3 organizations created across the country. We get the Uniform Building Code coming from an organization in this part of the country, the Boca Code, and the Southern Code. All right, now we're gonna fast forward a bunch, go through World War II, the housing boom, all this history I'd love to talk about, and we get to 1970s. And now we have corporate home builders across this whole country. Now we're less regional, right? We're starting to grow. Transportation has grown. Railroad systems have grown. I mean, we're all across the country now. We got home builders building across the country, and they're like, this is ridiculous. A house is a house is a house. It's human shelter, and we can't build it the same across this country. So architects and contractors did a lot of heavy petitioning and persuading to these code organizations to come together and write a code for homes, because they knew that homes were key to human survival and shelter. If you can't build a Starbucks, you're not going to die without your coffee, but a home is key to human survival. So these 3 organizations come together, the 3 code organizations. Of course, you see the 4th little logo on the side. That's the American Insurance Association, which was the new name of the National Board of Fire Underwriters. They were involved in this very first edition, 1971, but very soon after this, CABO was developed as the Council of American Building Officials. The insurance company went away from it, and those 3 legacy organizations kept moving forward, trying to unite the country under one set of minimum standards for housing, for human shelter. So just a little side fun tidbit. This is what was going on for plumbing around the 1970s and 80s. You look at all these plumbing codes, standard, basic national, blah, 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 blah. I just wanted to bring this slide in to show one more player in the game of codes. Look at the National Standard Plumbing Code in 1980. Who was it developed by? Code from contractors. So we also had contractor organizations trying to get in and say, let us lead the organization, let us lead the industry. Finally, we get more into some of the stuff today, some of the stuff I know that you guys want to talk about, energy and sustainability and the societal concerns we see again arising today. This is a book I have from 1979. Again, it's research done by the federal government. Who's got the money? Federal government's got lots of money. They did this research. Inside this book, you see them here talking about now in 1975, Congress enacted the energy policy. And what this Energy Policy and Conservation Act did is it simply created funds. Again, money. A lot of times all that we want from the federal government is money, not their opinions. So money comes out that says, now how can we use this money to assist states in reducing the growth rate of energy consumption? How do you do that? How do you assist states reduce growth rate? Well, they went through a study and they found that, hey, the best way to do that was to create initiatives to affect the local building codes. And then further in this, I would want to talk more. I want to talk for 3 hours about this. You see all those same names come up. Look, BOCA, ICBO, all of that. So they turned to these nonprofit, non-government model code organizations and said, write us a model energy code. And so here you see that Council of American Building Officials, all 3 organizations of the US trying to create one thing, one minimum thing that would be acceptable to the whole country, right? Because it's not being written by a government, one little city government. What does this represent again? Society's expectations. We constantly see the code evolving and changing and chasing the expectations that are already established in a society. So what did they say in 1983? Insulation of hot water service piping. Air leakage. Oh my God, air barriers? I thought that was a new topic. Nah, they're talking about air barriers in 1980, 1979. Air handling duct systems and insulating them. Okay, all this same stuff back in the 70s, because what do we have? Energy embargo, the oil embargo, all the energy fears drove society to say, oh my gosh, we've got to do something. And so the codes came and followed suit. Now, fast forward again, we're almost done. I'm probably hitting that 20 minutes or beyond. ICC now. We get these three legacy organizations, and they finally come together, not just as CABO for just homes. They come together for the entirety of construction codes. And they are trying to now satisfy the needs of a very diverse country. We love talking about diversity in this country. I love the diversity in this country, but then somehow we don't like diversity of thought. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, they're trying to say, okay, we got to come up with a thought that will be acceptable for all the diversity of this country. What do you think that's going to be? A really restrictive, really high thought, or is it probably going to be a bottom of the barrel thought, right? Because we're trying to capture one thought for all of society, okay? So what are some of society's expectations? This is funny as we look through the transition from CABO into the I codes over this 5-year period in these 3 books. The CABO 1 and 2 family dwelling code never had energy inside of it. It had every single thing you could think of for homes except insulation. It always pointed you back to that model energy code. By going to a different code, it's a way to say, we're not making you do this. You know, energy is kind of controversial. Move to the I code world, and the International Residential Code is now the first comprehensive residential code that includes a chapter on energy, insulation, air barriers, and all that, instead of making you go to a different book. And we saw a major backtrack. Why do we see a backtrack? Because we went from fantasy land to reality land, quite frankly. In this CABO 1 and 2 family dwelling world, we did not have the majority adoption of one model code like we do today. And so we had this energy code sort of like, it was there. It was these great ideas for energy in this other book. And ideas in a book are just ideas in a book. When we went to the IRC, that was it. I mean, we are now wiped out all other code organizations. This was going to be the go-to. So what did it have to do? Drop to the least common denominator of all 3 of those codes. And we saw very minimal energy. Now, fast forward through a few cycles of the I codes. 2009, as an anecdotal example, 2009 was the first time we saw mandatory pool covers for heated pools. In 2009. 2012 came along and made a change to say, you don't have to put the cover if 70% of the energy to heat the pool is from renewable source, like solar panels or whatever. 2009. But look, if we go back to 1983, heated swimming pools equipped with a cover, exception, 20% of energy. But that disappeared and had to come back in 2012 for us to re-see that. Why? Society's expectations and desires. So again, these are just books. They're nothing but books. They're just stupid books. I got lots of books. You got books. They're nothing but books. Okay? And ICC is trying to write that book so that governments will say, that's a good book. Governments across this whole diverse country. So if they get too crazy with that book, and these governments go, we cease to have a model code organization. So they're hitting that lowest common denominator. They want to be attractive to as many governments as possible to satisfy all that diversity in our country. But what else does it say in the 1927 UBC? It says, look what up, guys. We're just going to let you know, this book is not perfect, and it will never be perfect. And so we're going to criticize it, and we're going to keep adjusting and adapting it over and over every year. They used to do it every year back then. So they recognize from the beginning, it's going to always have to chase society's expectations. Now, don't tell your local building inspector it's not perfect, okay? I may not get you far there, right? All right, that's just a silly slide. Almost done here. Here's all of our I codes. Every 3 years now, we get the IRC re-changed, remodified. In 2024, or excuse me, the 2024 IRC, if you want to make changes for it, you've got to put that proposal in 2022, because that's when it's developed. It's 2 years in advance. Now, if you have codes mandated by a government, which is the whole purpose of codes, right? Codes, I mean, their idea is that they're a minimum standard and they're going to be mandated by government. That means that every code is a government code, period. So I just took you through this whole history. It started with local codes and bring us all the way through this creation of this great model code, ICC, trying to, make everybody happy. It doesn't become anything but more than a book until it's amended into local law. And now those local politicians are back into play to say, whoa, this isn't going to work for our city. We got better plans for our city or lower plans for our city. Again, this country is beautifully diverse. So this gets amended into local law and they go back through, and here's just an example off the internet of one city in this country. They took a year to do all their own hearings, all their own review, and to modify the 2018 codes over a year period, and then they can finally make the 2018s effective. So I kind of sometimes don't like all this amending and changing the codes because it's really hard on the construction industry. But I like to look at it sometimes as what they're doing is testing new codes on a smaller population. Because if you make something code and it becomes government regulated and it's not right, that's not a good thing for the public. So testing it. So I want to show you this one last thing before I wrap up here about how code works and why we often see this delay and what this amending can kind of do. So let's say at 2018 IRC, many cities across this country, January 1st of 2020, they adopted the 2018 IRC because adoption usually comes a fair bit later. And when they adopt this 2018 in January 1st, 2020, they say, we don't like, it's not perfect, but we have a perfect idea in our city. So they amend it with this great idea. Now, it's too late for them to put that great idea into the 2021 IRC because that was finalized in 2019. So they'll have to wait until the 2024 IRC, which will have proposals due in January sometime. So what this does is it gives 2 years for that local city to kind of test out their code. Is it good? Did the people accept it? Was it a good balance between safety, freedom, and all the other fundamentals of the code? Okay, maybe so. They put it in as a proposal, and that code becomes adoptable in 2024. But as we know, cities aren't adopting right away. They take usually time. It's typically about 2 years later before you see mainstream adoption. So now it's 2026, and that great idea from 2020 finally it went to the code hearings. It's awesome. Everybody loved it. And boom, it gets into the 2024 IRC. It took 6 years from when that city first tested their idea. But let's say it wasn't a straight shot in, which a lot of times it's not in the code hearings. I'm involved with that. So let's say the great idea needs a little work. So now they're pushed back. They got to go for the 2027 IRC. That's 2025 proposals ready for adoption in 2027. Not going to hit mainstream till 2029. So we got about a decade delay between a local city testing out some regulation on free people before it becomes a mainstream, a decade before it can become a mainstream adoptable regulation. Now, some people like that. I kind of like that because I'd like things to be well tested before they take away American freedoms. Other people may not. But that gives you an idea of why you see such a delay sometimes in the model codes. So my final thing I have to tell folks is, look, the code is not a horrible thing. The code is not a weapon to be used on you. The code is for everybody. And there's no price that blocks you from it. You can view the codes for free at codes.iccsafe.org. Right here, I click free view and I can look at the entire 2018 IRC. Guys, if you like this history stuff, it's interesting to you, it happens to be I'm doing a webinar tomorrow, 3-hour webinar called Building Codes, Purpose, Process, and People. Tomorrow morning, it's even your time zone. It's actually sponsored by the New England Building Officials Association. You can see that tomorrow live as a live webinar. It's going to include so much that I wanted to talk about today, but I also have that class available on demand, and this is at buildingcodecollege.com. This is my dream, my career, rest of my life, rest of my career goal is to make the code positive, to make the education available to everybody, to stop it being a weapon of the government and to let it be a shield and a tool for the free American people. And I'm doing that through buildingcodecollege.com. Check it out. I put together a little coupon code, BS Beer. Anything at any classes, any webinar, anything I have at Building Code College, if you use that coupon code, you can get 15% off. And that's it. There's my code nerdiness. I'm sorry, I think I went over that 20 minutes.
Don't apologize at all, Glenn. That was an excellent presentation. The chat box is going crazy with people giving you virtual applause. You're most definitely a gifted speaker, and I really appreciate the dynamic presentation, the rundown history. I could go on and on. I'm a big fan, and I really, yeah. I'm gonna pass it off to our fellow co-hosts, and certainly I want to give John Deans an opportunity to pop in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. That was great. I've got a lot of ideas or questions or comments. One is sort of along. How do I say this? So in places where building codes are not enforced, like a lot of us are pro building codes. We see stricter building codes as being a way to make the future more safe and sustainable for everybody. On the other hand, places like Vermont and most rural places don't have any building codes, and people seem to do okay there. One thing that comes up a lot is if you had to choose, with the goal of making houses safer and making and keeping the planet habitable, is builder training perhaps more effective than having stricter codes? Are they both important? Are stricter codes more important than builder? No. Which comes first? I guess that's the question. Is builder training or stricter codes? Which is first?
Sure. So I can't just give quick and easy answers, because I think for miscommunication, we're too much into one-liners these days, right? And then that's like a headline that doesn't give all the story. So what I want to say to that is willful compliance. That's everything I fight for, I teach for, I encourage, is willful compliance. It's what I teach building code officials. I teach them to say, stop calling yourself a code enforcement agent. Stop saying you're enforcing the code. Stop saying force. Instantly, I'm turned off. Instantly, as a man, as an American man, as a woman, I don't care. Instantly, I say, force what? You're gonna come to my home and force what? Instantly, I'm on defense, okay? So any idea of enforcement of the code as a means to create progressiveness, I laugh at. That's silly. You'll never get progression out of me, even if I agree with it, if you try to come with force, okay? Call me an egotistical ass, I don't know, man. But it's like, I think that speaks for what a lot of us feel like, especially when we are talking about residential codes in our private homes. So I would never encourage code force from the government on a free American population in their homes as the mechanism to drive change. I would absolutely say education, which is the whole thing for buildingcodecollege.com, the whole thing about the code not being a weapon. So I mean, there's a resounding answer to that, is education and willful compliance. Anybody that doesn't want to do something code compliant in their home, the moment you contractors leave or the inspectors leave, it's a phony, there's no safety. Those people will do whatever the hell they want to do in their home. So nothing will lead to safety and change if you can't get that homeowner to do it. That was long, sorry. I'll try to shorten those answers.
It's all good.
I don't want to derail you, Mike, but I want to rebut, just because I think it's so important to take responsibility for the home, not just for that current occupant, but for the down the road occupant, the next person who's going to live in that house. I feel responsible for the homes that I build for 100 years or longer if I can. And while the person who's in there now may not want that railing because they don't like the aesthetic or they don't want to pay for it, if the next person that moves into that house needs that railing for safety, I want it to be there. I don't want them to fall down the stairs that I built. I think that's important. And that's why I say it shouldn't just be whatever you want, it's a suggestion. I definitely feel like there's an important responsibility level, and I'm afraid that in our society there's too many people who don't do what's responsible when it's optional, and that's my only rebuttal to that. I'm not trying to pick.
And just let me say, I'm a code guy. Are you kidding me? Like, yeah, I'm libertarian, freedom-oriented code guy, but I'm a code guy. Yeah, you're darn right you're putting the guardrails up. What I'm talking about is if I go up and say that, damn right you're putting those guardrails up, and then I leave, they'll do whatever they want. And then that new homeowner that comes in better hire a really good private home inspection, private property inspector. Because that homeowner, it doesn't matter what the code says, but if I show up and say, hey, ma'am, you know, this is an elevated floor, this is a fall hazard, it could be very dangerous, you know, sometimes we're walking backwards, not always paying attention to what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. And you try to sell the code. You sell that guard so that when you leave, they're like, yeah, that inspector had a good point. You know, at first I didn't like the guard, but yeah, that's all I'm talking about is selling it so that you get willful compliance. This idea, these inspectors out there putting their power on American people with that attitude, that's just silly. The day they go home from their job, their effectiveness on their society is ended.
Can I ask, teasing something Mike alluded to earlier? He mentioned places that don't have codes, but I don't think there are those places because don't the states have some version of the IRC on the books that you have to build to that minimum standard, although there's no enforcement, admittedly, but you still have to follow the rules in that code book that the state has adopted. Am I wrong?
Yeah, no, it's Maine. If you're in a town under 4,000 people, and if your town has not willfully adopted the code, which only like 4 towns have, then you're not required to follow any building codes except the plumbing code, which was interesting. I've always wondered why, and one of my questions for Glenn was why is the plumbing code the one that's enforced? It sounds like maybe it goes back to Hammurabi, but Maine is supposed to be changing that this summer, but COVID derailed it. But it's as of this summer, Maine is supposed to be, everybody in the state is supposed to follow the code, but it's not. You don't have to enforce it in small towns. So,
is it only Maine we're talking about?
I feel like I've heard that said about Vermont too.
Yeah, so, you know, Vermont doesn't have any codes except an energy code, and lots of other rural places aren't on building codes, as far as I know. But that's my understanding. But Glenn would know better.
I'm biting my tongue over here.
Yeah, you go.
So it's state by state. So I talk in depth about this in my webinar tomorrow about Dillon's rule and Cooley's rule and these justices back in the 1800s and how we divide the power in this country from fed to state. States are granted that authority, but then states can choose, and they do choose, whether they take the authority or whether they pass it down to the local municipalities. There's about 3 flavors out there. States that do it all at the state level, and that's that. Most that I see are states that do adopt a state level code, and then they tell the local municipal, the smaller level governments, you can amend this code only to be more restrictive, not less restrictive. So it's the same thing. At the state level, they're saying this is the lowest bar for anybody that lives in this state. But if your little town wants to be like the leading progressive or whatever amazing town, you do what you want. It just has to be more restrictive. You can't go less safe. So
who decides what's more restrictive, Glenn?
Well, hold on.
I mean, that could be.
The third, real quick, I'm sorry I get long-winded, is like Colorado and a lot of other states. There is no state code. So Colorado, we have tons of jurisdictions up in the mountains that don't have a building code because we don't have it at the state level. The state has 0 on building codes. But interestingly to you, Mike, we do have state plumbing and electrical codes. And then I'll stop, but there's reason why, but I don't want to take all the time. So more restrictive, good question. That'd probably be per the states, Patrick, to say what's more restrictive. But that's the general flavor of it, is that the states will regulate the minimum and then the individual jurisdictions can go a little tougher. And then you have the full-on home rule states like Colorado. Now, since we got dead air time real quick, I'm just going to keep talking here to answer your question, Mike, about why it's very common that plumbing and electrical are the two. This is my opinion. That is plumbing and electrical are very commonly regulated at the state, whereas everything else isn't. They're more magical, is my take. Like, a house collapsing on somebody, I mean, other than we get snowstorms with porch roofs that were built without permit, like, we don't see tons of just homes collapsing anymore, like, and buildings just collapsing. I know, I mean, they happen. There's plenty of headlines. But plumbing and electrical is like magical. Like, bad things can be happening in your plumbing and electrical, and the average homeowner has no clue these bad things are happening. If they start to see the rafters sagging down, like, structural failure is so much more vividly visual. And so there's a better reaction to it. There's a better, we got a problem here. Electrical and plumbing is not as obvious when you have a problem. This is my guess, my opinion.
I think it's also that plumbing can affect, potentially millions of people, right? If you have bad plumbing, it's not just your own life that is to worry about. It's public safety.
The cross connections. Mm-hmm.
So John made a point about that because it has the greatest potential for off-site impacts on the environment and public health.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're talking about here is what impacts the social contract and what doesn't. So there's like, I get to do whatever I want on my property. And there's, but what are you doing on your property that impacts everybody else? And I think that's kind of where I sort of go a little bit further with all this in terms of like the Cotton Eye Joe reference here of where should they go?
Yeah.
And to me, it's, when we're talking about buildings, we're talking about using resources that are really part of the social contract. And when we're emitting tons of carbon willy-nilly, that's impacting other people's lives. It's like there were the fire underwriters. We ought to have like climate underwriters, right? Like, if we're doing things that impact the climate, that's impacting everybody. We don't get to live in a world anymore where we can just do whatever we want on our own property. We're too interconnected. We're beyond that at this point, especially when we look at issues that are so systemic like climate change, but even toxic chemicals, can go there too. In terms of the indoor air quality issues and material VOCs and stuff like that, all that, in my opinion, should get a lot stricter too, because, there's also a divide between what a builder, a designer, an engineer knows and understands, a manufacturer of a product knows and understands about those attributes, and then what a client understands. And I think that part of strengthening the social contract is looking out for homeowners and clients who they're not going to sit there and read the code book. And so we should all be up to speed on that. And I kind of think about this in terms of if you're going to make stricter codes, which I think they should get progressively stricter particularly in terms of energy and environmental impact. That's kind of where I sit. But there's sort of a triangle of strengthening codes, strengthening education, and licensing. Somebody else, I think Bruce Friedman, had a nice post in the chat about contractor licensing, and different states approach that in different ways. But if you're going to build somebody's house that could fall down on them or burn or, emit a whole bunch of hazardous substances in the community, you should be licensed to do that. Like here in Maine, there's no contractor licensing whatsoever, which also has the impact of like, we don't we talk about it on the job site and stuff and with our peers, and it's like, we don't even really have a profession in that sense. Like we're, anybody with a pickup truck and a skill saw and a hammer can kind of do whatever they want, so to speak, especially because in this state, the codes aren't, most people I think who live in the state of Maine don't really have to operate under the code, because most towns in Maine are rural and under that cap that Mike was talking about. So, and I think every state has its own permutations of that, but I think that you have to have, professionals who are licensed. To be licensed, you need to understand not necessarily the code, front to back, but you need to be able to know how to utilize the book, how to, they're good books, right? I like that, Glenn. Like they're good books, and you need to know how to access that information, or, you have to have continuing education relating to it. But then I think that the part of the social contract is we all need to get together and fund that however it needs to be too. Like if we're going to create the regulations, create those funds so that, code enforcement or education officials in our towns, can really have the resources they need to help local builders understand the codes and walk them through the process. So I think, it needs to be a three-legged stool. All those things have to work. You can't just sort of force a bunch of codes and then not give anybody the support to do it.
Yeah.
And I think in particular, like last week's BS and Beer was great sort of platform for this, because Bruce had a really good thing about how this testing of local codes, around things like climate and energy is a great way for people to get involved in it, try it out, move it forward, but also just kind of create a precedent that now, manufacturers and builders and everybody else has to learn from. You can do a lot in that space, I think, before it has to go to the international level, and you can still get a lot done.
Can I ask a dumb question? Why does the code language have to be so completely unintelligible? Why is it so hard to understand what you guys are trying to say, Glenn? Why do we need at least as many pages dedicated to interpreting the words that are written in the book?
Legal process.
So again, I attend the code hearings. I put proposals forward. I work towards making the code a better minimum standard. And I will tell you, a tremendous amount of code proposals are all about clarity. If a code is read and interpreted differently, which we are never going to get away from. We have two documents, Second Amendment, Bible, that humanity and Americans will forever argue about the interpretation of. So if we believe something strong enough, we'll make up whatever interpretation we want. But when you have a code that is hard to read, that is my trigger on it is if I hear, because I do decks a lot, I focus on debt codes, I get a lot of feedback from the nation. And if I hear of codes being interpreted differently, the same words, then I say that's prime for a code change. And sometimes it's not changing anything technical, it's just changing how it's written. Now, let me try to answer slightly more, Patrick. Right here underneath me, I've got all these codes, right? The 2000 IRC was about 560 pages. The 2018 is up to 960 something pages. It's the first time I think it got 2 pages shorter, and I swear it's just they used smaller font or something, I don't know. Almost double the growth, okay? There's a few things this growth means. A lot of people think it means more prohibitions, and it does. But it also means more pre-approved design. And so that's where we see a lot of the growth. SIP panels and insulated concrete forms getting included. And now we got tiny home appendix, which will probably get pulled into the main code. And these are just examples off the top of my head. But when people come up with a new product or a new method of construction, they want it, if they can get it approved in the code, it's pre-approved, it's pre-engineered design, and it's meant to help people. Again, it's meant to help people get to build a very affordable shelter for their humanity without paying an engineer, without paying a design professional. Emerald Homes, I bet, builds freaking bad to the bone homes that 5% of the American population can afford. So I'm getting off on a tangent now. Anyway, I even forgot what I was just saying. Got on a tangent. Because I was thinking about a lot of things I wanted to respond to, which part of that is, like John, responding to you. Any idea someone has for where the built environment should be mandated to go needs to ask the family living from paycheck to paycheck in an apartment that just someday wants a backyard what they think about carbon in the atmosphere. I mean, look, I am not an idiot. I understand the problems of climate. I understand what humans are doing to this world, and I don't understand more than I pretend to understand. But humans wanting to survive and live, I'm telling you, most of the American population could care less about the climate change because they're worried about how they're going to get groceries next month, or the fact that they live paycheck to paycheck. I basically live month to month. I'm not even in some category of money to spend. I will never have an electric car because I wouldn't trade my time in life that I don't know how much is left to make enough money to buy that electric car and to save the planet. And I have 3 kids. So maybe there's some selfishness there. Okay, I'm talking. Pass it off to you guys.
That's a good little tee up, actually, because one of the examples I wanted to bring in was what's happening in Maine with building codes. So building codes in Maine, we've been stuck in 2009 for a long time. We're going to 2015, and it's being, interpreted right now. I can't remember when it takes effect, but I believe it's early 2021. But part of an adjacent program that's happening is the Maine Climate Council. So this is an area where one part of public policy is really sort of interacting directly with another area. And, the governor's asked a whole bunch of folks around the state to get together and talk about what we can do about climate change in the state and how we can decarbonize more rapidly and become carbon neutral, I think by 2035. So the Building and Infrastructure Committee actually came up with a plan that kind of does what you're talking about, Glenn. Like, it sort of takes into consideration that people are in different places. So when it's a progressive change. So it's not going to like overnight hammer people with a whole bunch of new stuff that they have to do or anything like that. But it's also looking to create funding for like energy upgrades in people's homes and give people, a leg up to help do that. Because I think we also have to recognize, that we need a just transition. Like, we need to transition to a low carbon economy, low carbon society, or zero carbon. But we need to do that in a just way, and we need to respect people's different economic and cultural positions and how much they have access to newer technologies. Like, you're totally right. I mean, we're a custom home builder. Every home we build is different. We're building to a very high standard, and it can be really expensive for people, and it's not for average run-of-the-mill home builders, or clients. But I think that we have to have policy that really recognizes the whole systems that we're a part of, while still moving the ball forward, and again, providing education and resources to make it happen. So I think we have to be pushing forward, but we also have to have a hand back and be grabbing people along, and do it in a time scale that's both rapid, but allows, sort of a curve to happen, so that we can have a slow ramp up and really hit something hard in the next decade or two that can decarbonize more radically.
Can I ask another dumb question?
Please.
How does the ICC fund itself? Is it strictly through selling the books themselves and the websites, or where does that money come from?
So I don't work for ICC. I do a lot of work with ICC and a lot of relationships with them. And I recently had a conversation with somebody there about that exact subject, because there's been a lot of lawsuits lately going on with some private proprietary people stealing copyrighted material, blah, 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 blah. And that's why I made a point to promote that you can view the codes for free. You do not have to pay to see the government laws. They are free. So there's been a lot of hoopla about that. And so, yes, originally these code organizations, the code official organizations got pretty much their funding to do their work of developing the code through the sales of the code book. In recent conversations with someone at ICC, and don't quote me on any of this, is anecdotal discussions, they said that the ICC has noticed the societal pushback against the idea of having to buy the code, because a decade ago, they didn't have free viewing online, I don't believe, but maybe more than a decade ago, but this is something more new in reaction to this. And ICC basically has been working towards creating new revenue streams to where he said to me, it was approximately 20% now comes from book sales. And again, this isn't an official number from an official staff member. It's anecdotal discussion in my professional discussions, about 20%. But ICC has recognized that society, again, responding to society doesn't like the idea that I have to pay for the laws I have to hold to. And they've been trying to push away from book sales as their revenue stream. Real quick thing to you, John, about education, about moving forward and pushing the ball forward. The only thing I can say, man, is perspective. Perspective. I can't argue anything that you say, because I'm not a custom home builder. Like, I respect and I'm so interested in all these different perspectives. The perspective I can tell you about being a building inspector for 13 years, I'm still struggling writing failed inspections for things that I can go to 100-year-old code book, and it has been prohibited for 100 years. And I'm still beating my head against getting people to not do it that way. We got HGTV, we got flicks and flippers in the middle of the night, 24-hour home makeover. We have a society that's constantly being promoted to the fact that construction is easy. It's stupid. It's immigrant workers that can't speak English. They whistle at the pretty ladies walking by while they have their lunch. We have dumbed down and disrespected the construction industry that you would not understand the amount of homeowners that think they can do anything Emerald can do and do it better. Okay. I mean, this is, you would not believe what I see, what you see from that building code, from that guy that has to take the code and make it work in American backyards. I would love to be more progressive, but I'm still fighting to get people to learn something we've known for 100 years. A few thoughts on that. Like Maine, I happen to be doing a lot of work with Maine right now. Maine just sponsored like 7 webinars towards the end of this year. Hey guys that are in Maine, reach out to the Maine Building Officials Association, because they sponsored a webinars and they got lots of free enrollments. They are trying to promote education. I know there's a new person coming in, but it's not just Maine. All across this country, you have states that say a building inspector that is supposed to try to make this code, get the American people to do what this progressive code we want to do, 12 hours of education. And, and a lot of that education, a lot of the building inspectors are arguing, half of it has to be on sustainability and energy, and not on fire protection and things that I love sustainability and energy. I'm not against that, but I see people that are about to kill themselves that I'm like, dude, I don't want them to kill themselves, and I can't get society to respect and trust code enough that they don't do really dangerous things that honestly, we got some work to do in education before we can, and that's the thing, we keep pushing that bar forward. We got this 1,000-page book. The building inspectors themselves don't know half of what's in this book, guys. And I'm not putting down my fellow code people. Love you guys if you're on this line. I tried to get some code people to come over today. But look, the straight up point of the matter is these things are getting so complicated, even the people that are supposed to enforce it, administer it, don't understand.
Yeah, the last 3 or 4 code officials I've had reviews with, we'll do like a 20-minute review, and these are all code officials I've not met before. And once we review my thing, and they'll ask about whatever all the life safety and structural stuff. Once that's all clear, once they understand that I understand like insulation and when vapor retarders are allowed and those things. In every case, they've grilled me for like 45 minutes on, okay, so what is it if you have this situation with like 2 inches of exterior foam, then what can you do? It's like, okay, there's a need for more code official training. But I think the bigger issue is that for most builders, like all of us, I read the magazines and go to your webinars, and we're on BS and Beer, like we're kind of the upper end on well-educated builders. Yeah. Most builders, the most knowledgeable, educated person they're coming in contact with on a daily basis is their code official and their lumberyard salesman. So those are the people who they really have a lot of influence, and that's just not even trying to push the sustainability aspect, just on trying to get basic compliance, because I still meet a lot of builders who think that meeting the building code is challenging, and that building officials are capricious and whatever. So it's that building officials have I don't know if it's a responsibility, but a position to be educators, but we need to make sure the building officials are educated first.
Kudos to you having nice conversations with like that. That's what we need to do. That's
it's fun for me.
Tomorrow, we can all learn from each other. The inspectors can learn from you, but especially builders like the folks on this line. Like I say, guys, like most of construction is not done by you top 5% builders. Most at 13 years in code in the 7th biggest city in Colorado, which isn't saying much for Colorado, but it's not done by the pros. It's not, and we don't push that message to society that like, you know what, maybe you shouldn't do this. Like, you're not going to do brain surgery on your wife, are you, Mr. Smith? Why are you going to replace your gas water heater and you don't even know what a union is or something, but we've dumbed it down. And it's unfortunate. I'd like to see us, continue to we need to bring the construction industry and code industry up and then we can bring the code up.
Those things go hand in hand. There's a really important point being made there that's not being verbalized perfectly, and I don't think I can do it perfectly either. So as I stumble through it, please be patient. But to me, the idea that by not making the code more stringent or not trying to make it, I don't want to use the word progressive because that gets people upset, but we are trying to progress society. We're trying to make things better for our children and our children's children. We want to leave them clean air and clean water, and the resources that we use to heat and cool our homes, if we do that irresponsibly, those are finite items. They do not regenerate. So a life safety issue of clean air and clean water is coming for someone down the road. We're responsible for it now to do our part. And so I think a less stringent code, or making it optional or not required or not enforcing it, that doesn't move us along in the right direction, in my view. And I think that while I appreciate the idea of not making it a cruel enforcement, and everyone's got a story about a bad code official that they worked with that gave them a really hard time and interpreted a code in a way that wasn't consistent with the way they were taught. And that's true. And there's a lot of bad builders too. There's really bad people in almost every industry. Yeah. They're not the majority. I think most people that get into the work that we do so for other reasons, because you can get rich doing a lot easier stuff. I work really hard, and I think that most of the people that are in this field work hard, and you could make better money doing something else, I think. So I don't think that our responsibility is to serve well the bottom of the barrel in terms of building standards. But as John said, we do have to make affordable housing. So it is that partnership. It is that marriage of let's educate the builders and let's educate the code officials. And yeah, just because it's not quite 1,000 pages yet, let's go ahead and get it over 1,000 pages, as long as it includes the important things that we need to do to keep improving, to keep making the buildings, they'll be more affordable in terms of heating and cooling costs if they're better built. Sustainability is a function of good design and good detailing. And yes, code enforcement, check me on that flashing. Did I miss that flashing? By God, I hope the inspector catches it, because I missed it. And that's going to rot out that wall. It's going to be an air quality problem. It's going to cost that family that bought that affordable house a ton of money to rip that wall down and re-insulate it and replace all the rotten wood and replace the window that failed because it got water in it. Like, there's a huge opportunity every time we touch the house. Being a builder is not easy. It's super complicated, just like enforcing the code and knowing 1,000 pages worth of rules is super difficult. But we have a lot of super difficult jobs in the world, and people are doing them anyway. Doctors have to know all sorts of different medical books that I've never even seen, just volumes, and they have to be able to recall that and do it at a moment's notice to save somebody's life. I'm not saving anybody's life. I'm just trying to build a decent house. And if we have people that are building 100 decent houses that aren't the 5%, serving the 5% of the market. I mean, I build an affordable product, or at least I try to. I'm not a huge custom builder with millions of dollars in my pocket. And I just bought my first new car this year. Congratulations to me. I'm just saying, my point is that the high volume builder who's building what people say, oh, it's a code minimum, that's a crap house. Mm-hmm. Those guys can make this much of a change that the code can force them to make and say, you know what? We're going to go ahead and adopt. And boy, that's the place I want to take this conversation is I really think adoption of the code, because I think the code's great, but we have so many people who don't adopt the code that we can't make that progress. And if we would force a minimum standard to be adopted by a certain time, like step code does and things like that, we could make a huge difference for our children and our children's children who can live in these homes that aren't being ruined right now. And there are a lot of homes being built today on the 2009 code or on no code that won't be here for those people. They'll be in the landfill. And that's a different problem. Sorry, soapbox. But I do think it's the marriage. It is the education of both the code officials and the builders and the design professionals. They play a very important role. If we would read, if every builder would read the plans that they're given, I wonder how much better things would be.
You're just killing me. There's so many things I want to respond to there, but I'm going to let some other folks talk. Well, so first thing I want to say is this. When you talked about minimum code, that's a crap house. You mentioned you bought a brand new car. You got your first car, and I smiled in like excitement for you because it's a new car. I didn't ask if it was a Ford Focus or a Tesla or a Camaro. right? I didn't ask, was it a minimum budget, federally compliant car with a backup camera and airbag and the other federal minimums? I didn't
It's got
ask.
that in
I
mind.
was just proud of you, and I was just excited. You got a brand new car. Let me tell everybody listening. So we get this done real fast, and I am getting that ornery look on my face. It's not towards you, but it's because I'm sick of this in the industry. A minimum built, brand new deck, furnace, water heater, house is awesome. And
Couldn't
is
agree more.
nothing but should receive smiles and congrats. Oh my gosh, you got a new deck. Look, it's 10 by 10. And it's out of like pine. You can barbecue out of the mud. I am so excited for my fellow American with that piece of crap minimum deck, and he finally can barbecue and have a party. I am so sick of the down talk of minimum code like it's bad. And I used the car as an example because I didn't say, hey, cool new car, but is it one of those like economy cars, you loser? No, I gave you a... So that's my first thing. I'm sick of code being looked at. Trust me, guys, minimum code, if people knew what it said, you're talking to someone that like lives and breathes the IRC specifically. That is an amazing book to build great structures. Yeah, there's some imperfections and the latest building science stuff that we're working on. A minimum code, anything. Congratulations to you, my fellow American. Don't let anybody make you less proud if you built it or you bought it. Kudos to you. All right. Sorry, that's just like a thing I'm sick of hearing.
I totally agree with you.
And I didn't mean it as an attack on you, Travis. I've had 2 beers now, so I'm like getting all worked up. No, so there were more things you said that I wanted to respond to, but I kind of freaked out on that one a little bit. Let's see, the other thing you were talking about, well, hand it off to someone else. And let me think for a minute.
John, you made a point in the chat box, or you sent a link that I'm going to look at tomorrow, but it was something about a more ambitious take on the energy and building codes. Can you kind of sum up what that's about, what you were referring to?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar. I haven't actually read through the whole thing, so folks could be ahead of me if they even got 10 pages into it. But it's basically how to look at incorporating greater. And I think it's the looking down the nose of the code thing is sort of relevant to this, because for us at Emerald Builders, we're building super energy efficient houses that are super airtight. And so when we see code requirements that are like 3 ACH 50, I apologize for the dings. I don't know how to run my computer properly, apparently. For us, we're like, well, we're regularly hitting 0.12 ACH 50. And like, we put a lot of diligence into our air sealing. But our opinion is like, if you take any care at all with your air sealing, you should be below 3. And then at that point, we're talking about, well, now you need mechanical air handling systems. And then we kind of get into this, just transition area where it's like, well, now you're building a bit more expensive house because you're putting more equipment into it and it's more airtight and all these kinds of things. So I think for me, it's about, putting those things in the code, making it progressive. And when I say progressive, I mean that it's like a progressive curve. I mean it more mathematically and less politically, that there's a sort of progressive change, happening. And the links that I sent are a bit to the main side of things, but then the NEP doc that sort of looks at incorporating more, into the energy code. So it's not just, the fire and structural engineering and all of that stuff, there's no argument there whatsoever. But I think there's also a little bit of like, as a society, we need to find a way to bring everybody's bottom up. We need to allow, everybody to have access to a better product and have lower heating costs. Like in Maine, we are burning tons of, heating oil. And if we were able to have a program here that allowed people to add more insulation, do better air sealing in new construction and in retrofits, we'd see, fewer carbon emissions, but also people would, have lower energy bills, and that's good for everybody. So, it's about sort of mixing all those priorities together and saying like, look, this is good for everybody. Let's find a way to do it. And let's find a way to do it through in our opinion, through government intervention and find programs. Like we have a great, program in Maine, Efficiency Maine. It's way underfunded. It needs more funding. You can get some, rebates for heat pumps and heat pump hot water heaters and some efficiency upgrades and stuff like that. But we should find a way to make that more affordable for everybody, so that, when you're at the store, you don't have to buy, just the cheapest hot water heater. You can, buy a heat pump hot water heater because it's effectively an equivalent price, and it's going to save you a lot down the road too.
So I can see there's only 10 minutes left or so. I wish there wasn't. I wish we could keep talking. I still got 4 more beers. Oh, well, there's 2 things that I did want to try. I'll try to be quick so I don't eat our last 10 minutes. So nobody get upset. And I'll keep names out or city names out. But I work as a consultant as well. And I help a lot of cities and I do a lot of work out there. And what I'm seeing happening, first of all, affordable housing. That's it. It's minimum code. That's done. We don't need a different product. We don't need a different name. We don't need a different program or movement or anything. Guess what affordable housing is? It's minimum code. We're done. I'm aware of an affordable housing building that was built through government money to support affordable housing project unit for a multifamily building to be built. And it was built through this affordable housing agreement, but it was a private builder. The private builder received government money to build the affordable housing and to promise to limit the rents for 40 years. And that's how they received the money, is they had to promise to limit the rents. I happen to be very aware of this building. I'm trying to keep this generalized. 40 years. That building's going to last a lot longer than 40 years. And the person that privately owns the building knows it. So you know what that building had? You know what that multi-family affordable housing, marketed as affordable housing, got federal money and local and all kinds of government free money for affordable. It had 10-foot ceiling heights. It had full-size walk-in closets that were about the size of my teenage boys' bedrooms. I live in a 1956 ranch 1,200 square foot home, and I've raised 3 teenagers in it. And this affordable housing multifamily, here's the gist of it. It was bad to the bone. Granite countertops, 10-foot ceilings, walk-in closets, because 40 years from now, it becomes in the money in the private hands of that private builder, and he can skyrocket the rents, and he built a very high dollar building now. So I get sick of this affordable housing stuff because I've seen the corruption of it. Affordable housing should be IRC minimum standard, and we don't need to talk any further. Now, next thing I'm going to say that I've seen, a lot of these cities, progressive cities, I don't care what you want to call that political, I'm so sick of the politics in this country, progress. They are trying to move, I'm using the English language as intended, progressive, to promote human progress. They've amended these codes. They've amended these codes to require all kinds of things like 2-car garages. Like, you good luck building a house anywhere in a major metropolitan without building a 2-car garage. It becomes minimum code. If you want shelter, you got to have 2-car garage. You got to have a hardwired plug for an electric car that's connected to getting to build your shelter. If you want to build shelter, you're mandated to put in something for a future car for transportation. Okay? That same city, in that same code cycle that they increased sustainability hugely to be this leader, they also created a new occupancy to create little homeless caskets that they would put in a community village with like a central building with a shower and eating, food and a kitchen, or not food, a kitchen, the living, the eating, the cooking parts of a dwelling. And then a little tiny like sleeping thing that they would move in this transient type of thing. That was codified to create a new minimum, but not a minimum for everybody. Because if you wanted to build a house, you got to put a 2-car garage and electric wiring for an electric car. But if you're on the bottom, if you're one of the have-nots, there's a different set of standards for you people. Same cities are the ones creating parking lots for tents and saying, this is okay. This is good shelter for humans. and they're putting porta potties there, and they're saying, this is good, this is good. We are creating two different now divisions with two different minimums for my same fellow Americans. I don't have a different expectation of human life and conditions for the richest of my American friends versus the poorest of my American friends. And I see it happening in the code where we are raising it for the haves and lowering it for the have-nots. And that is messed up.
Somebody here just made the...
Sorry, but I'm like, I believe in this. I love my fellow Americans, and I don't believe in two different standards.
Somebody here just said that we're almost out of time, which is true, and we didn't really get to the where is the code going, or where do we want it to go. Maybe as parting thoughts, somebody could, I guess our guest speakers could offer some insights there. Low brief, I guess.
We are very different. I want to see the code always be a minimum to get shelter for all my fellow humans, all my fellow Americans, and not shelter owned by some landlord in some little apartment. I want them to have the same opportunities and freedoms that we all did. And anyway, that would be the direction I want to see the code go, is to always remain a minimum that is suitable for the mass majority of Americans.
And I'm gonna see the building code be part of a systemic, more holistic approach to making our society and our planet better and healthier for everybody. So I don't think that we're probably really in disagreement at the end outcome here, that everybody needs a better place to live. And I think that it's the interpretation of how that happens. And so I think the building code has been, like, as Glenn sort of gave us the history, it's sort of been this thing of kind of special interests, like different interest groups have kind of put this together in different ways. And now we have an opportunity to really integrate it with broader policy goals that we have. And then I think as a community, it's our job to be there as builders, architects, designers, engineers, and practitioners, and participate in those conversations so that it does reflect what we need professionally, and then what, be a voice for our clients as well, so that the whole thing is much more holistic and less itemized. I mean, I think our whole public policy needs to be far more holistic and have all these things connected.
I would love to see code focus more on the things that really matter short term. Like we were talking about envelope failures and rotting walls and houses that are going to be huge problems for people in a pretty short period of time. We have no enforcement process for that. There is no envelope improvements. These are things we get wrong over and over again. Should we really be focusing on 3 air changes per hour when we can't keep people to build houses that soak the walls and fill the houses with mold and rot away and cost people tons of money in a pretty short period of time? I think some of the emphasis is wrong.
And I'll go ahead and chime in with my weekly. It's not an either or, it's a yes and. We can work on both of those things, or all of the things in the whole book. That's a big book, but we can still work on all of them, I think. I think it's worth the effort.
Proposals, January 2022. Patrick, you got some code that's hard to read? Come on, rewrite it, buddy. Put it in.
Dude, my company has made a fortune selling books interpreting the code. Why would I jeopardize that cash cow?
That's hilarious. I talked to a fellow code nerd educator that I'm like, why don't you get involved with changing the code? And he was like, dude, every 3 years they mess it up, gives me new stuff to teach. And I'm like, okay, I get it. That's funny. I think that everybody's goals here are good. And I think that's just what we need more in this country, is not wanting one person's goals to be the win, but realizing there's a lot of goals and a lot of importance, and it all overlaps. And we got to chat together about it, and no one person should win what they want. I don't expect to win what I want. I'm just going to be that little voice to keep that balance. And likewise with you, John, in your direction you want to go. I hope you don't win 100%, but I hope your voice, and that voice like yours, always stays in the conversation, because that's how code should be developed. Code should not be developed the way our politics goes.
Yeah. And I think Glenn and I probably agree on this, that it's about everybody here and everybody who possibly can being involved in it. Find a way to be involved in it. Municipally, state, federally, internationally, get involved in it. You got to have your voice in there because there's, that's who's running the show, whoever shows up.
Yeah, it's very true.
Well, with that, everyone watching, do your part, man. Do the good work. It's attainable. Just like these great guests tonight coming on and having this conversation. That's how we're moving things forward. So I want to take a moment just to thank Patrick, John, and Glenn for joining us tonight. Excellent discussion, guys. Great presentation, Glenn. It was a real pleasure having everyone back. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Right.
Thank you.